I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons, my Bibliosprand, Bibliohowlers, and Bibliomancers. Thank you so much for supporting my hobby and passion even more. It means so much to me. Hi everyone, Petrik here. Today's video will be a book review, and this is not for a fantasy book, not for a sci-fi book, but for a horror book. Yes, because this is the month of October, I thought I might as well contribute a review of a horror book this month. And this is for Swan Song by Robert McCammon. Once upon a time, someone has decided to read Robert McCammon's book, and it has become one of the best decisions he has ever made. I did not start reading Robert McCammon's books with Swan Song. My first time reading McCammon's book was 4 years ago, and it was for a book depicting a coming-of-age story of a boy's life in Zephyr, Alabama. Reading that book felt like finding a gold mine to harvest. I did not look for it, it just suddenly called out to me, and somehow Boy's Life became one of my favorite books ever. If you know my reading taste, then I think you will most likely know that my favorite genres to read are fantasy, sci-fi, and historical fiction. Mostly epic fantasy. I rarely venture outside of these three genres. Not because I don't want to read anything outside of these three genres, but because I still have so many books and series that I want to read in this genre. But I like to occasionally read outside of my comfort zone. And that usually leads me to read literary fiction, mystery, or horror novels. And I will argue that sometimes horror can be categorized as fantasy as well. And I think Swan Song has some elements in it that truly belongs in the fantasy genre due to its supernatural and magical elements. But anyway, if you have heard the title Swan Song, you might have heard that it is often compared or judged against The Stand by Stephen King, another super popular and highly praised classic post-apocalyptic novel. And where do I stand on my judgment? I think The Stand is great, but Swan Song is vastly superior. So this isn't just a review of Swan Song, but I will also talk about my experience of reading The Stand and Swan Song for the first time, and why at the end of the day, I think Swan Song is better. Swan Song is arguably Robert McCammon's most famous book. Similar to The Stand, it is one of the most highly praised post-apocalyptic classics, and I will contribute my resounding praises to it. Stephen King did a superb job in showing the terrifying effects of a deadly plague that almost annihilated the entire USA in The Stand. Swan Song did not revolve around a plague. Instead, McCammon terrifically displayed the devastating results of World War III, or in other words, nuclear war. As you can guess, America as it was is gone forever, and every surviving citizen has to go beyond their utmost best to survive the aftermath of this calamity in a brutal wasteland born of rage, fear, radiations, filled with monstrous creatures and marauding armies. This is probably not a unique premise for a novel, especially not in 2022, but remember, this book was first published in 1987, and McCammon's execution of the story instantly hooked me. Swan Song definitely stand out and deserve its classic status. I am serious about this, from how the crimson tornado of fire advanced and filled the sky, blue streaks of lightning lanced through the clouds, tons of blackened earth gouged, and a million dreams of humanity shattered hypnotized my mind vision. I knew from the beginning through the way it is written that I was in the presence of a special book. Thinking about how many millions might be lying dead out there warped Josh's mind, like trying to figure out how big the universe was, or how many billions of stars wink in the skies. But right now, there was just this little girl, sobbing in his arms, and she could never see the world in the same way as before. No matter what happened to them, she would forever be marked by this moment, and Josh knew he would as well. It is bloody incredible. McCammon tells a story filled with themes I've read about countless times, but the deliverance was nothing short of outstanding. Swan Song can get pretty bleak, violent, and depressing. There is no doubt about that. Horrible actions were undoubtedly accomplished, and one among many things in the book, let's not even get started on how creepy Job's mask is. I did not know anything about this book entering into it, except that it is a post-apocalyptic novel, and I was surprised, in a good way, by some of the events and descriptions in the book. In its horror aspect, I think the description of Job's mask is one of the creepiest and most unnerving imagery I have ever read. However, it would be a huge mistake to say Swan Song was utterly full of darkness. One of the most dominant themes in Swan Song is to find and brighten that tiny light of hope in the forced immersion of evil landscape. The definition of Swan Song in our world is a metaphorical phrase for the final gesture effort, or performance given before death or retirement. And it fits this book. In this story of good versus evil, just like The Stand, or defiance against malevolent force, through the ensemble cast of characters, McCammon explored the meaning of a man letting the real beast within taking control of themselves. But more importantly, McCammon also examined the importance of virtue in the presence of despair and destruction. McCammon achieved this by using his characters, prose, and multiple plot devices, and I think everything was done brilliantly. I thoroughly loved McCammon's prose. I already voiced this when I read Boy's Life, and even though Swan Song is done in a different tone and narration style to Boy's Life, it was once again excellent. Here's the thing, McCammon employed a third-person omniscient narration style here. This is something common in novels published in the 80s and early 90s. It is also statistically one of my pet peeves and why books published pre-1990 tend to not work with me. I often find third-person omniscient narration or head-hopping jarring and distracting to my immersion and investment in the story and characters. In one paragraph, I read the story from one character's thoughts, and in the next one, I have to read the story from another character's perspective. There is nothing wrong with doing this, but personally, having this repeated throughout the book usually ends up annoying me. But that is not the case with Swan Song. I was incredibly invested in all the main characters, protagonists or antagonists. The narrative always felt engaging and intimate. McCammon nailed the voice of every single character so distinctly. I never felt distracted. Skillful focus and care were put toward the characterizations, character relationships, and their respective development. Every character has a crucial role in Swan Song. Swan, Josh, Sister, Mule, Killer, Robin, and the despicable Roland and Macklin, nothing felt wasted on the tomb. If I discuss the magnificence of each character in this review though, we will spend all day talking about this book. Instead, I will say this. If I'm forced to choose favorites, Swan, Josh, and Sister were my favorite characters in the book. Even more so for Swan and Josh because this duo embodied some of my favorite tropes to their maximum effect. Fun family and badass and child duo. How this duo endured, persevered, fought, and cared for each other in the apocalypse was inspirational. And you know what? Amazing characterizations is also one of the main things that made The Stand by Stephen King mostly so damn good. What is it that made Swan Song better than The Stand for me then? Well, at 300,000 words, which is shorter than The Stand by more or less 160,000 words, and I know this might enrage some of Stephen King's fans, Swan Song is much more worthwhile and ultimately more satisfying and rewarding to me. I will straight out say this as simple as possible. I think The Stand has one of the most disappointing and anticlimactic ending I have ever read. I just cannot believe after reading more than 400,000 words and 1,000 pages, after all the awesome build-up and development, the final confrontation, the final stand itself started and ended so instantaneously. It left a sour taste in my mouth. And honestly, I found this lack of intense action scenes, especially at the final chapters of the book, to be quite common in older novels. Once again, there is nothing wrong with shorter battle scenes or final confrontation scenes. But I, as a reader, especially when I'm reading an epic scale novel, whatever the genre is, I'm the type of reader who prefer a long, postponing set of action or climax sequence. And Swan Song, despite being published in 1987, delivered that for me. I read the final more or less 200 pages in one sitting. And believe me when I say, with how busy I am now, compelling me to read 200 pages in one sitting is very close to impossible. But all the meticulous build-up and crescendo toward the epic convergence resulted in unforgettably explosive, breathtaking, and emotional final pages, and sleeping hours were happily sacrificed as I greeted the dawn of a new day after devouring such a gratifying reading experience. Swan Song is one of the best post-apocalyptic novels that I've read, and it is also one of the best standalone novels of all time. It is dark, violent, engaging, filled with profound beauty and hope, and extremely worthwhile. Swan Song has been called classic for decades, and I think this status is rightfully earned. Out of Robert McCammon's long bibliography of books, I have read only Boy's Life and Swan Song, and both of them are included in my list of favorite books and favorite standalone novels of all time. That's 2 for 2, and I already feel at ease calling Robert McCammon one of my favorite authors. One more favorite books written by him, and I will definitely include him in one of my favorite authors of all time lists. I still have so many books by him to read, and now I'm struck with a dilemma. What's next? Well, after doing research and hearing so many great things, I think my next venture into Robert McCammon's books won't be a standalone novel, but it will be a series. The title is Matthew Corbett. I cannot predict when I will read Matthew Corbett yet, as it depends on my reading mood, but I heard that there is only one book left in the Matthew Corbett series. So it is likely that I will begin my journey with Matthew Corbett series after hearing some news regarding the final release date or the approximate publication date of the final volume in the Matthew Corbett series, if I can wait that long. But for now, for Boy's Life and Swan Song that I absolutely love, let me end this review by saying thank you so much to Robert McCammon for writing these books, and bravo, these books are awesome. So that's it for today's video and review. It is quite rare for me to read outside of fantasy and a classic as well. If you have read Swan Song, do let me know whether you love this book or not, and if you have read Swan Song and The Stand, do tell me which one do you like more. I personally think Swan Song is much better, not only for the reasons I just mentioned, but mainly because it has a much more satisfying ending, making the journey so worth it. So yeah, that's it for me today. As always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. Bye bye. Lastly, I want to say thank you so much once again to all my patrons who keep on supporting me.